We are ready to go here on our YouTube channel at Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers. Opening line report. It is on for week 13 of the NFL. And now the Thanksgiving weekend is finished with some of the interesting results we saw this past weekend. We now transition into week 13. And you have Buffalo, New England kicking things off on Thursday. Some pretty good games on Sunday, too. Dolphins, 49ers out in Santa Clara. Also, Tennessee and Philadelphia. They meet up in the city of brotherly love. So a couple of games that we will focus on. Also, you have the rematch of the AFC Championship between the Chiefs and the Bengals in Cincinnati. Bengals beat them twice last year, so we'll see if the Chiefs get some revenge this time around. With all that being said, let's bring on Patrick Everson. And Patrick always has the dirt. He's got it all on where the books are going, where the sharps are going. And Patrick, before we begin, it's good to see you again. I guess I know that the Monday night game has not been played, but what is the report from the weekend and how the books did?
I think generally speaking, the books did pretty well. I didn't hear any of them complaining. Some of them had a little bit more of a mixed bag than others, but really that Browns result, as much as, the Browns Bucks game, it wasn't like, it's semi-high profile because you've got Tom Brady in it and the Bucks were coming off a bye. So apparently they were a pretty popular play there. And, the Ravens Jags doesn't look terribly sexy, but apparently both those games were bet into pretty well because of the public being on the Bucks and on the Ravens. And so those two results definitely helped the books out quite a bit. They were pretty satisfied with that, and as well as a couple of other games as well. But I think the public recreational bettors probably took a little bit of a hit again this weekend, which is kind of a recurring theme this season.
Yeah, and we saw on Thursday the Lions, they ended up covering as a dog. The Giants covered as a dog, and Minnesota ended up with the victory over New England. And on Sunday, of course, Tampa Bay lost. The Chargers didn't cover in their win. So just a lot of interesting things on Sunday. Let's go to Thursday now, Patrick. Bills Patriots. It is a rematch of the wild card game in Buffalo. The Bills blew them out. But the first time the Bills played the Patriots last year was that wacky game in which New England threw the ball, 2 or 3 times with Mac Jones. They ran the ball the entire time, beat Buffalo. Buffalo beat them the second time at home, or rather in Foxborough. And then the third time, the Bills won the wild card game. Bills a 5.5-point favorite here against the Patriots. What are you hearing on this game?
Yeah, right now on this one, actually at the Superbook, it's down to 5. Superbook here in Las Vegas. Well, they operate in a few other states as well. And on Sunday night, as I do every Sunday night, I get some great information from the Superbook on the opening lines and some of the early activity. And that opened 5.5. They went down to 5 today. And they were seeing action right out of the gate on the home dog, on the Patriots on here. This is from Casey Degnan, who's a senior risk supervisor at the Superbook. And he notes that, even though it's the Thursday game, neither of these teams is on a short week because they both played on Thursday for Thanksgiving. He thinks it's just going to be a really good, good action both sides. Or both teams are somewhat popular among the public. The Bills are really popular among the public, no question. And New England was popular for years among the public and maybe has lost some of that luster. But as Casey noted, the Bills are going to be a favorite leg in parlays and teasers and so forth, money line parlays, all that. So I'm sure they're expecting to need the Patriots in this game. That said, the Superbook opened 5.5, went down to 5. They're sitting 5 right now because they got some early action on the Patriots. Probably some sharp play taking the dog early out of the gate.
And also, Patrick, the Bills 1-4 against the spread the last 5 games. They didn't cover the Detroit game. They barely covered the Cleveland game the previous Sunday in Detroit. I know the Browns got a late touchdown to make it look a little more interesting. But you think people are getting a little scared off trying to lay all these points with the Bills?
I think they are, especially if it's a lot of points. This isn't, as significant a number. But yeah, I think it's something that John Murray at the Superbook, he told me on Sunday, and he was speaking more to the, to the Chiefs, to the Rams Chiefs game. But a few teams like the Chiefs, like the Bills, 1 or 2 others here, the Eagles, just to some extent as well. He said bettors are just really less inclined, especially public bettors, which is the majority of the bettors, are starting to get less and less inclined to lay those really big numbers. They'll stay away or only feed those teams into money line parlays, which really doesn't necessarily add a whole lot of value when you're talking double-digit favorites, but that's what the public does. The public's going to do what the public's going to do. But yes, it is definitely pushing people off of them a little bit, and I'm sure the Bills are part of that as well. To your point, I mean, they haven't really looked like the Super Bowl favorites of late. They've been, it's close wins, if not outright losses over these last few weeks for the Bills, and not covering spreads either.
Yeah, and Patrick, when you flip over to the Chiefs and the Bengals coming up on Sunday, and that's a AFC Championship rematch.
Mm-hmm.
That game, if you remember, Patrick, the Chiefs were running away with it, and they didn't score before the half. That kind of got the momentum swung to Cincinnati a little bit. Mm-hmm. Joe Burrow and the Bengals, they chipped away, ended up sending the game to overtime, won in overtime. And a lot of people, I don't know if they remember this, I'm sure the Chiefs remember this, but the Bengals won a wacky game late in the season at home against Kansas City, in which the Chiefs built an early lead again. Bengals won. So you got the double revenge factor there. Chiefs still favored on the road. Cincinnati's been playing well. They beat Tennessee on Sunday. What are you hearing with this game?
Yeah, it's really interesting for all the points that you just mentioned. The fact that really two times in basically a month span, I think they played in week 17 last year in the regular season. And to your point, the Bengals were down 28-14 in the second quarter of the regular season game. They were down 21-3 in the second quarter of the playoff game. And the playoff game is in Kansas City. So it just, like you said, it's a double revenge spot. Kansas City's got to be kicking itself. Can't believe they lost to that team twice when they held leads of 2 touchdowns or more in both games. That's got to be quite an unusual occurrence, especially for certainly for the Chiefs over these last several years. But as Casey pointed out at the Super Bowl, he expects good two-way on this. They did take sharp money right out of the gate. They opened 3, Chiefs 3, took sharp money right out of the gate on Bengals +3, and they went to +3 -120 on Sunday night. But I'm checking back this morning; it's down to 2.5. So it looks like they're continuing to see some activity on the underdog there, and they're down 0.5 point. Total, they saw some sharp money come in early on the over, which moved that from 51 to 51.5. And now, that was last night. Now this morning, Monday, as we're all talking to you now, 52.5. So the total is already up 1.5 points in this game. They're expecting some scoring, and which, you can understand. These teams played to pretty, with the overtime game last year in the AFC Championship game. And that was, which was 27-24 overtime win for the Bengals, so 51 points, and then 34-31 in that regular season game where again Cincy rallied at home, so 65 points in that game. It looks like bettors are expecting Burrow and Mahomes to light it up a little bit.
And Cincinnati, Patrick, if people remember this, they were 0-2 against the spread, well, straight up and against the spread. Out of the gate. They lost to Pittsburgh and Dallas. They're 8-1 against the spread the last 9. The only loss came on Halloween against Cleveland, but they keep covering these numbers, and it just showed you how much respect that the odds makers had for the Bengals on Sunday, even without Jamar Chase going into Tennessee, who had been on fire, and they still were favored in that game, and that was a revenge spot for the Titans for the loss in the playoffs last year. But there's no way you can make Kansas City an underdog at this point. Is there any team Kansas City could be an underdog against, maybe at Buffalo?
Maybe at Buffalo. I think they probably would be a dog at Buffalo, but that would probably be it. And there's certainly no way you could, as you said, there's no way you can make them a dog in here, even though Cincinnati is on a nice little run and beat Tennessee, which to your point was on a really, you could argue that Tennessee and Cincinnati going into that game, notwithstanding the Eagles' record, but just how the Eagles have played the last couple of weeks, prior to the Sunday night game. Although even then they let Green Bay back in that. But you could argue that short of the Eagles, and maybe even not short of the Eagles, that Cincinnati and Tennessee are the 2 hottest teams in the NFL. So, and as you said, they got that respect. They were favored all the way. That number came down late, but Cincinnati still went off as a 1-point favorite on the road against what's looking to be a pretty good Tennessee team. And got the job done, got the win, covered all the numbers, 1, 2, 2.5. I think some places had the Bengals 3 at one point, but again, the Chiefs are just a whole different story. There's, Cincinnati hasn't been strong enough this season to consist. They're getting there. It looks like they're really starting to round into form, but early season was a little bumpy. I don't think there's any way you could have even thought about making them a favorite here, but it should be an interesting game. And this is, Kansas City's hitting Cincinnati when Cincinnati's playing well. If this game had been 3 or 4 weeks ago, a month ago, Cincinnati wasn't in quite the same shape. It seems like they're kind of rounding into form. And if they get Chase back, they thought they were going to have Chase on Sunday against the Titans. So I would assume they'll have him back this week. That'll certainly bolster that team as well.
Kansas City also won 5-1 against the spread the last 7 games. They barely covered against the Rams. I mean, who would have thought they'd be laying 15.5 before the season began? But obviously the Rams are a bit of a disaster right now. So another game we'll look at, we just talked about the Titans, Patrick. They are in Philadelphia to take on the Eagles. Philadelphia outlasted Green Bay on Sunday nights. They remain now still with 1 loss atop the NFC East, but Dallas is lurking. And Tennessee still feels all right atop that AFC South. But the Titans here, even though they didn't cover in the loss to Cincinnati on Sunday, they've still been a great ATS team since stumbling the first few weeks. What have you heard here with the Eagles favored again against the Titans?
Yeah, so currently sitting 5.5 at Superbook, and that's down a full point. And all of that was probably most of it wasn't so much action as it was. Well, I take that back. So when a team is playing in the Sunday night game and the Superbook releases its odds late Sunday afternoon, just prior to the Sunday night football game, they'll take that team and whoever the opponent is, they'll take that, they'll take the next week's game off the board for both the teams that are in the Sunday night game. So this was only on the board for maybe a couple of hours Sunday at the Superbook, and it didn't move at all, but it opened 6.5, Eagles 6.5, and it then came off the board once the Titans, or rather once the Eagles kicked off against the Packers. But Casey said, again, Casey Degnan at the Superbook, he said, we took a couple of smaller bets on the Titans, but nothing significant prior to it coming down. Game goes back up this morning, and it's 5.5. So it's already down. The odds makers have already made an adjustment of a point. Sounds like some of it was off action, maybe some of it off of what they perceived to happen last night in the Packers game. I mean, even though the Eagles won, maybe there was some sort of adjustment they saw that they felt they needed to make. But down from 6.5 to 5.5. And that said, Casey said he thinks by Sunday morning, this coming Sunday, they'll be rooting for the Titans to win outright. He thinks, the Eagles are going to be a very popular teaser and parlay play, certainly a popular money line parlay play, and they're at home. So could be a really nice non-conference clash, but they expect they're going to need the Titans here again. And again, to your point, Tennessee's been playing really well. It's not, they fell just outside of the number yesterday, but prior to that, they were 7-1 straight up, and they cashed in all 8 of those games. Certainly could have won and or covered yesterday. So definitely playing well with Derrick Henry.
Yeah, we also saw last year, Patrick, with Mike Vrabel, that they went through, I believe it was October or so, they had a bunch of underdog outright wins. It wasn't even just covers. They were winning these games. They went and beat the Rams on Sunday night. They had a win against Kansas City at home. And then this year, when you look at some of the underdog wins at Green Bay on Thursday night a few weeks ago, they hung with the Chiefs. They should have beat the Chiefs at Arrowhead with Malik Willis at quarterback. They end up going to Indianapolis. I mean, again, then the Colts were favored, and I mean, now it would be different. But they won that game. And the only really bad performance they've had came against Buffalo back in week 2. And in week 1, they lost by 1 to the Giants. So this Tennessee team has been in every single game. So if you're getting points with them, I think a lot of people are seeing that now that, Tennessee's a pretty valuable underdog, where Philadelphia went through this little stretch of struggling past Houston on that Thursday night. They lose outright to Washington. They barely beat Indianapolis on the road, and they barely beat Green Bay, but luckily they got the cover. So maybe you think people are scared off of, like we said with the Bills earlier, you think they're scared off of the Eagles as well?
Oh, I think so. I think there's definitely something to that, especially with some of the big numbers the Eagles have been laying too of late, despite having trouble covering these numbers. Now, this isn't a huge number. It's decent. Opened nearly a touchdown, and to your point, it's already down a point at the Superbook, and I presume elsewhere. I presume everybody's on board with that.
All right, let's move on now to another interconference game. This is a Super Bowl 19 rematch, Patrick. Joe Montana and Dan Marino out at Stanford Stadium, if you remember, when the Niners beat the Dolphins, and Dan Marino would be back in plenty of other Super Bowls, but that never really materialized. But for this game, San Francisco favored against Miami. The Dolphins have won now 5 in a row. They're 8-3. They took care of business against the teams they should have taken care of business against, which is good. But now they get the Niners and the Chargers out west. They go to Buffalo coming up. And you look at the Niners, they've been outstanding defensively. They shut out New Orleans on Sunday. Niners, they're turning it on, trying to separate themselves from Seattle in the NFC West. What are you hearing here with the Niners favoring? And we're seeing the Dolphins as an underdog for the first time in a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Niners. Just and first off, great mention on Dan Marino there. Who would have ever thought after that first Super Bowl appearance he would never go back unless he was like an analyst? That's still an amazing stat to this day. But the Niners are definitely turning odds makers' heads. They're third, I think, pretty much a consensus third in the Super Bowl odds market, even though there are a half a dozen teams that have better records than the Niners at this point. The odds makers are definitely really keen on them, and I assume some bettors are as well, and that's part of what's factoring into that. But yeah, this definitely gets, as you noted, Miami's schedule is about to really upgrade. They're, no problem with Houston. They were able to pull Tagovailoa, who was getting kind of beat up in that game. They probably pretty fortuitous that they had a big lead. They could take him out and not let him have, endure any more wear and tear. But as Casey told me, again, Casey Degnan at the Superbook, he said one of the better games this weekend definitely is going to be this one. Should be a good handle game. It's it's later in the day, Sunday, so it's got some time to percolate. But he said right out of the gate, this opened Niners 4.5, and he said it was one-way traffic on the Dolphins right away. And this is Sunday night, so they went down a full point Sunday night to 49ers -3.5. And I'm double checking here to see where we're at now. Still at Niners -3.5 as we talk on Monday. And Casey said he isn't really surprised. The Dolphins are a popular bet because they're a fun team to watch that can put points on the board in a hurry. He thinks they might actually end up needing San Fran here. That'll be really interesting if that's the case. Casey certainly knows he's the guy behind the counter, and he and the trading team there at Superbook are top shelf. So I think they certainly have a good read on what they'll need. But that would be really interesting if they need San Fran at home, with San Fran, very much a trending team as well, playing well, 4-0 straight up, 3-1 against the spread in their last 4. McCaffrey seems to be fitting in nicely. I mean, it wasn't exactly an exhilarating win over the Saints, but sometimes you just have those games where you have to grind them out, and that's what they did. So it's definitely going to be an interesting game. I'll be interested to see if Casey's thoughts on who they need, actually maybe needing the Niners at home against a trendy Dolphins team is the case come Sunday.
The Dolphins this year, Patrick, they've been an underdog in games that Tua has started 3 times. They came back against Baltimore in week 2, a game they were totally out of. They had the huge fourth quarter. They beat Buffalo at home. Then the Cincinnati game on the Thursday night where Tua got hurt. And when Tua finishes games, he starts and finishes games, this Dolphin team is pretty much undefeated. I think it's 14-1 in his last 15 starts when he plays the whole way through. So it's been a tough team to beat, and Tyreek Hill has been great also for the Dolphins. But like you mentioned with the San Francisco team, anything on the total because of the way the defense has played. They obviously hit the under yesterday against the Saints. They went over in that game in Mexico against Arizona. San Francisco, it's been kind of up and down with their totals, but any number or anything you heard with the total simply because of the way the Dolphins can score and also the way San Francisco has played defensively.
Right, exactly. It's kind of the unstoppable force meets the immovable object potentially here with the way the Dolphins are putting up points, but the way the Niners play D, coming off a shutout of the Saints. At this point, the Superbook opened 46.5 on the total. Hasn't budged off that. So it hasn't, there's been no lean one way or the other toward thinking, okay, San Francisco's D is going to put the clamps on Tagovailoa, or Miami's offense is going to continue to keep producing points. It's a hurry up and wait, I guess, for the moment. But I'm going to take a look real quick here, just because DraftKings updates its splits pretty regularly, just to see what's they're sitting 46.5 as well. And there's surely hardly any money in the pot at this point. We're talking to you on a Monday. But of the wagers that have been made on the total at DraftKings, you've got 71% of tickets and 89% of money on the over. That said, total still sitting 46.5. And while we're at it, since I noted that the early action at the Superbook was on the Dolphins, which helped bring that line down a point. Early action very on the spread, very heavy at DraftKings on the Dolphins as well. People really, to the degree of how much might be in the pot at this point, which is not going to be a whole lot. It's like 5-1 tickets and 8, 9-1 money almost 9-1 money on the Dolphins in the early going on the spread.
Now, the Monday night game, Patrick, the Saints and the Buccaneers, the NFC South has been extremely disappointing, to say the least. And Tampa Bay won a few in a row. They beat the Rams. They beat Seattle. They had the bye week. They're feeling good about themselves. But then they stubbed their toes in Cleveland on Sunday in that overtime loss to the Browns. But Tampa Bay, they still got the path to win the division. Now they get New Orleans. And the Red Rifle, he struggled. Andy Dalton, they had so many opportunities deep in San Francisco territory. Granted, the Kamara fumble wasn't Dalton's fault, but still they couldn't get any points. And now they go to Tampa on Monday night. Buccaneers are favored. Have we given up on Brady and the Bucs? How can you make a case for New Orleans? Buccaneers beat the Saints earlier this year at the Superdome in a low-scoring game. I mean, I know it's a Monday night primetime game, but are people scared of back Brady, or they think, all right, they're going to get it together this week?
That's a really good question. So this is sitting 4 at the Superbook right now. And I mean, keep in mind, every year every year since Brady went, the last 3 seasons when Brady's been in Tampa, that team's been in the Super Bowl mix, and they were certainly in the Super Bowl odds mix preseason. They were like 1 or 2 or 3, and there was some time during the offseason where they were first on the odds board, even above the Bills, I think, for a short period. So, 5-6 straight up, 3-7-1 against the spread. They're 1-7-1 against the spread in their last 9 games, the Buccaneers are. And they're 2-4 straight up in their last 6 games. So this is not a team that looks like a Super Bowl contender by any stretch. This game opened 6.5 at 6.5 at the Superbook. And they got sharp money. Casey said they got sharp money on the dog right out of the gate Thursday night. Moved down to Bucks -6. Now we're looking at this, and I don't know if there was an injury update this morning or not, but you're looking at -4 at the Superbook now. So that is really interesting to me because the Saints aren't that good. I mean, the Bucks haven't played well, but the Saints aren't terribly good. The Bucks are at home this week. The Bucks really need a win. But Casey said he thinks both sides will see. He thinks it will be a good action game, even though it's. I mean, look, primetime games are always going to get their share of money just because it's the only game in town on a Monday night, and the American betting public can't get enough of the NFL, which I totally understand. But he thinks it'll get bet well, even though neither of these teams is playing particularly well. But what Casey thinks will happen in this game, and it may already be happening based on the way the early line movement we're seeing, where this has come down significantly, but he thinks there'll be more straight bets on the Saints, but he thinks the Bucks are going to be involved in everybody's teasers and parlays and so forth, money line parlays and so on. So he thinks that'll be the case. A little bit more play. The total in this game is kind of interesting since both these teams have struggled. He said they out of the gate, they saw a little bit of action on both sides, but slightly more on the under. And the total opened at 40.5. It's down a tick to 40 on Monday at the Superbook. So like you said, neither of these teams playing particularly well, but on a Monday night, people are going to be looking for something to wager on, and this will be it.
It's interesting, Patrick, that for some reason, I don't know what it is, since Tom Brady has come to the Buccaneers against New Orleans at home. They lost 9-0 last year as 11.5-point favorites. They lost 38-3 in 2020 as 3-point favorites. So Brady is, and I know 2 years ago it was Drew Brees, their quarterback in that 2020 game, but for some reason, Brady has had his struggles against New Orleans. Even the game back in week 2, 20-10, the Bucs got a pick 6 late. And for some reason, he just has not played well against them. And New Orleans, again, did a great job defensively against San Francisco on Sunday. Just couldn't score. So now you wonder, with the way Tampa Bay has just been so up and down, that if this is the time, all right, try to ride the Saints again, just because of the success they've had against Tom Brady, or is it, how do you make a case for Andy Dalton at this point?
Yeah, exactly. It's and that's a hard case to make. And I think as we get closer to Monday, bettors will have a harder time making that case. But as Casey alluded to, the Bucks will be the more public play, and so they're going to land in the money line parlays and so forth. Just thinking Monday night at home, the Bucks have got to get it together at some point here. And as you said, really the NFC South as a whole is just wholly disappointing. It's hard to believe. Yeah, I mean, really, the Saints aren't out of it. Nobody's out of it, right? In that division at this point, with how poorly the division's performed. I mean, it looked like 3-4 weeks ago, Atlanta might actually, be able to rise up. They were playing great against the spread. They weren't necessarily winning every week, but they were playing great against the spread and doing better than people thought. So I'm just surprised that Brady and the Bucs are this bad in what appears to be a pretty bad division too. And like I said, 2-4 straight up in their last 6, 1-7-1 against the spread in their last 9. Just doesn't look like a Super Bowl contender at all. And I'm just kind of curious, since we're touching on that, to see where they sit. Yeah, I mean, they're not even, they're rapid. They were 1, 2, 3 generally on the odds board for, all off season. And even during, the first several weeks of the regular season. Now they're 10th on the odds board at the Superbook. And I'm sure they're in that position, or maybe even further down the board at other slots. They're 25-1 now. This team was as short as, I know in the off season, I think they were, plus 600, plus 650, something like that. And now 25-1. Look, somebody's got to win that division. Maybe they figure things out over the next few weeks and you want to take a flyer on them, but not the way I wouldn't do it the way they've looked.
I'll tell you this. I'm looking at the standings now, Patrick, inside the NFC South. And the Carolina Panthers, who are off coming up this week, they finally get their bye week. They go to Seattle. They get Pittsburgh at home, Detroit at home, at Tampa Bay, at New Orleans. Carolina's 4-8. And worst case scenario, they'd be 2 back of Tampa Bay if the Buccaneers beat the Saints Monday. If somehow the Saints win, which again, it's not crazy because this division's terrible, then Carolina would be 1 back of Tampa Bay. Carolina has the best divisional record in the NFC South. They're 3-1. So they're already
in a favorable schedule, as you pointed out.
It's crazy to see what they've done. They're 3-1 in the division. They beat New Orleans. They beat Tampa Bay. They split with Atlanta. They lost that Atlanta game. If DJ Moore doesn't take his helmet off, they win that game probably. They kick the extra point. They'd be 4-0 in the division.
No, that's honestly, maybe that's a divisional. That's a really interesting point, and I certainly wouldn't have thought about it. But boy, it looks like they're probably the 4th team listed in the NFC South, but they've got to your point, they've got a kind of a pretty favorable schedule, wouldn't you say? And maybe that's worth an NFC South futures bet.
Why not? I mean, who can you make an argument for? Everybody's expecting Tampa Bay to just do it because it's Brady, but they've let you down so many times this year that Carolina, I mean, maybe Matt Rule getting fired and McCaffrey getting traded was kind of a jolt for this team. I'm not saying Darnold's the second coming of John Elway, but maybe, I don't know. Just throwing that one out there. I like that. I like it. I'm not going to bring up the Broncos with you. I'm just not. I'm not going to.
That's a bad football team.
Audience, let's ride. I'm staying away from them. I took Denver on Sunday. I thought this would be the time against Carolina. And, of course, Russ went again and disappointed everyone. I have 2 games to get to, Patrick, before we let you go. Sure. All right. I want your opinion on this. Deshaun Watson making his return to not only the NFL, but to Houston. That's the first game that the Browns will play with him at quarterback. Are people just going to blindly back Deshaun because now he's back? He hasn't played in a few years.
Right. And Cleveland's, I watched a good chunk. I was sitting inside the Superbook yesterday, working at the same time and watching because they got a great setup there. And, I've kind of watched Cleveland over these last few weeks. I don't feel like Cleveland is as bad as its record. I think that's a talented team. I'm not sure that this doesn't upset a little bit of chemistry here, but arguing against that at this point, and again, to remind, these are numbers, these are betting splits that are very early in the week, and betting splits are not, you shouldn't bet a game off of betting splits, but if you like seeing them and maybe use them to inform you a little bit, then I'm glad that people enjoy them. But at DraftKings right now, again, light money in the pot. It's only Monday. The bulk of the betting is going to come in on the weekend and in the hour or so leading up to kickoff. But 87% of early spread bets and 93% of early spread money on Cleveland at Houston. So, I think that speaks to something about perhaps the expectation with Watson. But to your point, Kevin, I don't know how you could pull the trigger on that right now, even if you believe that Watson still has plenty in the tank. He hasn't played in forever. So how you could have a reasonable expectation that he's going to come out and do really, really well there against a Houston team that, look, they got drummed by Miami, But that team has been in spots throughout the season more competitive than people thought they would. The record's not there, but they've been, I think, a little more competitive than people thought they would be. And how you can jump on a quarterback making his first start in 2 seasons plus or whatever it is, hey, he didn't play at all last year, did he? Did he get in a single game last year? He hasn't played all this season.
No.
So it's been forever. I'm just not sure how you could do that. But early tickets and money at DraftKings, at least, and perhaps elsewhere, seem to think this will be a positive jolt for the Cleveland Browns. I guess we'll find out.
All right, last game, just because you're based in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So the Raiders, they've needed comebacks the last 2 weeks in overtime, walk-off touchdowns against the Broncos and against the Seahawks. So all of a sudden, I'm not saying that the train has turned around for the Raiders, but at least they're playing a little bit better. And now you have a revenge game. The Chargers beat them at home back in week 1. Chargers beat the Cardinals yesterday, got the 2-point conversion late. They were trailing for most. I mean, LA took the lead in the second quarter, but Arizona was up most of that game. Chargers came back and won, so they bounced back from the back-to-back losses to San Francisco and Kansas City. Chargers are short favorite here. They went into Vegas last year. Week 18 as a favorite, lost in overtime, didn't make the playoffs. So are people going to ride the Raiders here, especially in Vegas, now seeing them as a dog again?
I think they will here in Vegas. They were definitely off the Raiders bus these last few weeks. Scott Shelton at BetMGM, he told me I was talking to him late Saturday night about several of the week 12 games, including the Raiders-Seahawks game. And he said, this is the least amount of money I have ever seen on the Raiders, going into that Seattle game. And multiple books had a huge need on the Raiders, a significant need, maybe not huge, but a significant need on the Raiders in that game yesterday. So they were pretty happy with that. But the first few weeks of this season and last season, of course, and so on, the Raiders have been a liability, even, at least for the books, whether it was maybe not nationally for a national sports book, one that's more widespread like BetMGM or Caesars or whatever. They maybe weren't a need nationally, but they were definitely, or rather a liability nationally, but they were definitely a liability locally. And that had been the case week after week here with local Vegas sports books like, say, South Point and so forth, and certainly the big, BetMGMs and Superbooks and Caesars of the world. So I feel like after these last 2 weeks that, and now they're coming home, I think there's a little bit of energy for them now, especially, 2 straight overtime wins, walk-off touchdowns in both. And Josh Jacobs, just an absolute beast. So I wouldn't be surprised if this picks up. Now, that said, I'm looking at early splits at DraftKings. And again, DraftKings doesn't operate in Nevada. So that's, there's a skew to that, but it's 3-1 tickets and about 2.5 to 1 money on the Chargers in the early going at DraftKings. Chargers -2, it looks like. But I think here in town, that these last 2 games, and especially how exciting that the game against Seattle was, and the big touchdown run and the overtime, I think that might change some minds. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the local, if there's definitely some local bias, some regional bias working into this game this week. I think the Raiders are going to get some play this week against the Chargers. And I think it might actually be a good play. They looked, they hung with Seattle really well and made it a really entertaining game. And like I said, Josh Jacobs is just unbelievable.
Raiders too, Patrick. I mean, think about it. They blew the Jacksonville game. They blew the Arizona game in week 2. Like, they've had games they've thrown away that you can say it's for any team. Okay, 1 game here, 1 game there. But the Raiders, yes, the 2 overtime games could have gone differently. I don't know if that's payback for the Arizona game or the Jacksonville game that they blew, and now they came back, in a positive way. But they win 1 or 2 of those, they're probably in the wild card race. I just think, unfortunately, now there's a little too far behind the pack. Right. But maybe the Raiders go on a run. They still get the Chiefs again at home coming up. Big game against the Chargers on Sunday. So we'll see how it goes. Patrick, for this week, we have the championship games in college football, among other things. So what do you have on Vegas Insider this week that the viewers can look out for?
Right. A little bit later today, it's Monday, as you and I talk to everybody here. A little bit later today, I'll have an opening odds and early action report on the 5 Power 5 games, from which, with the exception of the ACC, from which the college football playoff will be determined. So I'll have a nice update on all 5 of the Power 5 conference championship games. Unfortunately, the Georgia LSU game looked like it was going to have a lot of luster, but LSU wet the bed against Texas A&M. So that game doesn't have nearly as much luster as it had. But but it's brought others into the race. I mean, the Michigan Purdue game, kind of interesting, but what's really interesting is obviously, USC Utah is going to be a very interesting game. Can TCU keep it going, keep its undefeated season going, and get itself into the college football playoff? So I'll have an update on all 5 of those games, opening update, how some of the early action is going. And then that article will update all week long as well to, from multiple books, just so everybody can get an idea of how this game is how these games are being bet all week long. It's going to be a big Saturday, and it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. And then, of course, Sunday morning, I think it's like noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. That's when the committee will get together and announce the college football playoff. So right out of the gate on that, on Sunday morning, probably early Sunday afternoon Eastern time, we'll have an article up on Vegas Insider on the national championship game, or the 2 national championship semifinals, I should say. I'm sorry.
No, looking forward to it. You got all the bowls. We'll find out Sunday as well.
You betcha.
Who's playing in the Avis Car Rental Bowl and whatever.
The Poulan Weed Whacker Bowl.
All of them. So it should be fun. It should be very interesting to see what happens with all of that. So check out all of Patrick's work at Vegas Insider. Also follow him on Twitter at Patrick_. Or no, I messed that one up. I almost did it without looking. Patrick E_Vegas. I would have said that didn't make sense. Patrick_E Vegas would have made sense. But Patrick E_Vegas. You can find him on Twitter. Always great work on the social media as well. Patrick, thank you so much for the update, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kevin.
All right, that is Patrick Everson. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for watching. And as always, best of luck with your bets.